Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's class on composition tips and tricks, Intro to Abstract Art. I am your instructor, Adrienne Hodge. And if you are just joining us, this is a regular weekly class that occurs on Wednesday evenings at 6 p.m. Central Time and will be posted the next day on YouTube as well as the Michaels website under fine art classes, so you can always watch the recordings the next day if you missed something or if you just want to watch it again. So tonight's class is a bit of a precursor to what we will be doing next week, which is a premium class. And I believe it is our last premium class for a while. All the classes will be free going forward, so that's exciting. And but we had this one on the calendar for a while, for a couple months. So if you didn't get a chance to sign up, make sure you sign up because tonight's class definitely leads into it. And it's this abstract, I can't recall the exact title of the class, but we'll be creating this abstract painting on acrylic paper. So I'm using this acrylic paper and we'll be creating something like this using these really fun Sennelier abstract paint pouches. Let me grab the other one, and then so they come in 5 colors, the primary colors, and then black and white, and then we'll also be using these little liner as well, so the 3D liner. So they come 5 in a pack. I mean, they come in different colors, but this is just the primary set that I put on the supply list for next week. So Sennelier abstract paint pouches, and they come with some cool little attachments. You can squeeze them out in a variety of ways. And then the 3D liners, and they are so fun. I really enjoyed playing around with the thick paint, with just the textures that you could get, and not having to worry about necessarily mixing on a palette, although I think I put a palette as optional on the supply list next week. And if I left it off, it's because we really don't need it. We can just squeeze the paint directly onto the canvas paper and mix directly on the paper. So we'll be working in layers and building on knowledge of abstract art, which we will talk about tonight. So I'm going to put all that away. That was just to preview the class for next week, but the supply list that I had you get for tonight's class was very much based on that class for next week in preparation for working with such thick textured paint. So first of all, we have, I'll just go ahead and go over supplies facing you. Usually I switch to my tabletop view, but since I've got so many 3D things to talk about here. So we're using the Tombow dual brush landscape brush pens tonight, and then also the portrait set. And that was really just because I wanted some neutral colors more than what we had in the landscape set here. And then we've also are using some charcoal pencils. So the general charcoal set has both white and black charcoal pencil in it. And then you'll want, you know, a kneaded eraser, or really any eraser will work to go with this. And then we're using the mixed media paper. So I've got the Canson mixed media pad here is what we're working with tonight. And so everything we're doing tonight is very much with thick textured paint in mind, since that's what we'll be using next week. So I'll go ahead and switch to my tabletop view and we'll get started. Don't forget to tag your work with those hashtags, Make It With Michaels or Michaels Classes, and you can follow me on Instagram at Adrienne Hodge Art. And Chanel, our moderator, can also drop my link tree in the chat. If you're interested, you can find both my Facebook and my Instagram and my website through my link tree, and you can also sign up for private lessons if you're interested, or a free consultation regarding private lessons through that chat. And I am open for private lessons at the moment, although my calendar has started to fill up a little bit since I've been announcing that so much lately. So, but I do have some space for a couple more private lesson students right now. And then here are a few of my business cards with some of my celestial skyscapes that I do using primarily calligraphy ink. But I do a lot more than that. Anyway, okay, so yeah, speaking of things that I do in my personal work, this is the first time we are really talking about abstract work in abstract art in these Michael's classes. And I've been doing this for about 2 years, so it's definitely time that I start talking about abstract work a little bit more, because it's something that's such a huge part of my personal work. So tonight's going to be a focus on composition tips and tricks for abstract art. And, you know, many of us who are familiar with modern art, abstract art, have maybe heard the phrase, you know, well, anybody could do that, or my kindergartner could do that, right? And there's a great quote regarding that that says, modern art equals, I could do that, plus, yeah, but you didn't. So, you know, the main thing that to keep in mind when it comes to abstract work is knowing when to stop. The reason why a kindergartner, you know, can often, like, yes, kindergartners can create amazing abstract work, but if you let them keep painting on it, a lot of times they'll take something that's feeling kind of like this and has some magical moments happening, but then if you don't take the materials away from them at just the right moment, then it ends up getting, you know, all smeared and covered up, and then it loses that magical quality. But adults have the same problem knowing when to stop. You know, when is it done? When is it developed enough? Because it's very quick and easy to get some really cool results, but then kind of having a plan and then an exit strategy is like the main points to keep in mind. So that's what we'll talk about today, is like, you know, what makes an interesting composition for abstract art, and then what are like the building blocks that we're using to create that work, and then also when is it finished, like quote fingers finished, or when is it developed enough that you know to leave it alone. Okay, so we're going to start by, I'm going to go to a blank page in my sketchbook here. Are there any questions about materials or anything before I get started?
Yeah, we have one question. Sarah says that she only has Artist Loft watercolor dual tip markers. What colors can she use instead?
You can use whatever colors you have handy. I will be honest, I was kind of skewing things to the color scheme that I used in next week's class, for next week's class. So I tried to find markers that had like a similar color scheme, like particularly this one right here is very similar. If you don't, you know, if you didn't catch that. So it's a lot of kind of peachy orange and maybe pinks and blues. So if you have those colors, then you can get something that's similar to this. And then I used similar combination in a lot of these, but then I introduced some green too. And I'll talk about color schemes as we get started here, but really any colors that you have are totally fine. I mean, you have what you have, so we'll just have to make it work. Okay, so yeah, but first I want to talk about composition. So I'm going to take that charcoal pencil that was on the supply list. And we're just going to sketch a little bit and talk about composition. And I'll tell you what inspires me in my abstract work and encourage you to find your own inspiration. Like I debated on having a some reference photos for tonight's class. But honestly, like I taught an abstract lesson once to a private lesson student, and I had her just pick an image that she found was interesting, and I picked an image that I thought was interesting, and I had an image from an Architectural Digest magazine. And I was looking at a picture of a beautiful bathroom with a clawfoot tub, and I used that as my inspiration. But what tends to inspire me the most in my work is underwater, the bottom of the ocean, and interstellar space for sure, but a lot of landscape as well. So those are just the 3 business cards that I have handy, but oftentimes I'm very inspired by landscapes. So the class that I had Chanel grab to share with you all, if there were to be, you know, a class that you could check out in this series that would be beneficial to you, it would, in what we're doing tonight, it would be the class on landscape studies that we had last summer. And if you're watching this playback on YouTube later, you can just search landscape studies in on YouTube, and they should come up. If you want to put my name in there, probably help you find it a little easier, or maybe Artist Loft, since we were still using just the Artist Loft supplies from Michael's at that time. But so in that class, I talked about composition in a landscape photo, like I'm about to do again right now. And I also talked about, you know, just atmospheric perspective, foreground, middle ground, and background in that class as well. And I talked about creating 3D forms and elevational lines of a landscape. So that landscape studies class could be very helpful, because in my work, in abstract work, I am often thinking about landscapes. You can kind of see that here, that this gives a sense of like water, or maybe a lake or something in the middle of water, and then some sort of organic, you know, growth coming out of the water here. And then I put these like little dots and things kind of that remind me of stars, or some sort of misty stream of bubbles coming out of things. So those are kind of the foundation of my work personally. And you are welcome to, you know, obviously we're going to be doing things that are similar to my personal work tonight in this class on abstract studies. And obviously you can copy, you know, what I'm doing and experiment with it as you're learning. But I just ask that if you post it on social media, that you tag me and, you know, give me credit for the, you know, concepts of the work itself, since it is my intellectual property here. And then, you know, that you don't turn around and try to sell it or something, because, you know, it is my bread and butter here. I am a professional artist who sells my work, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so
Hey,
yeah.
Adrian, really quick, we have one other supply question.
Oh, okay.
What is the hardness level of the charcoal?
Oh, it looks like I have a medium here, but you can work with whichever one in that set you want. I just grabbed the medium out of the set, and then I have the charcoal white. Okay, so the way we're going to break it down here is we're going to talk about shapes and forms, and then we're going to talk about composition as a whole. So first, we're just going to draw a rectangle. Just draw a couple of rectangles. You don't have to be perfect. And then we'll scoot that down better into the frame. And then, so let's do one that's portrait orientation and one that is landscape. You're welcome to do a few more of these little thumbnails here. And then as we, you know, get into the studies with the Tombow markers, we're gonna leave off the frame around them, but you can certainly, you know, continue drawing the frame if you you know, if you need it and if it's more helpful to you to organize it with a frame. So yeah, 2 rectangles don't have to be perfect, 1 portrait and 1 landscape. And then we're gonna divide those rectangles into thirds on the vertical axis and on the horizontal axis. And I'm just using, just eyeballing it. I'm not measuring it to make it perfectly divided, so it doesn't have to be perfect here. Perfection is the enemy of the good, right? So yeah, that one's way off, but that's okay. We don't need it to be perfect here. And you're welcome to use another pencil for this. I just was trying to limit the supplies on the supply list, so I didn't put, I figured we could just do all this with the charcoal pencil. Okay, and then we're just gonna put some like dots here where these lines intersect to emphasize these moments in our frame. So if you're familiar with the ancient Greeks and the idea of the golden ratio, they came up with this idea that if you frame things in a rectangle and then you divide them into thirds using the golden ratio, then, which is basically just what we just did, we just divided it into thirds using the golden ratio, and then you align the areas of interest with these points where your vertical and horizontal lines intersect, then you will have a more interesting composition. And we have been following these rules of composition in art history for many, many years. And, you know, it tends to be what we find aesthetically pleasing is framed with a rectangle. So think about, you know, your computer screen, your phone screen, your TV, credit cards, windows, picture frames. Obviously, like a lot of things are framed with rectangles. And then within those rectangles, what makes something more aesthetically pleasing is when things are aligned with these points of intersection. So what does that mean? The main thing is that, like in a landscape, since this one is the one that's the most obviously imitating a landscape, I've put the horizon line where, you know, the bottom thirds of this implied rectangle is. So, and these are all kind of shaped a little bit more like a square, but you can obviously divide a square into thirds as well and still follow the rule of thirds within a square. So, like, let's say we just sketch a quick little landscape scene in here. We might have where the earth is meeting the sky here at the bottom thirds, or maybe the sky is, the ground is taking up 2/3 of the space. But either way, putting that horizon line in the top thirds or the bottom thirds is going to make it, it's going to draw your eye around. So it's going to make it a little more interesting in that it's going to keep the viewer looking at it for longer. So, and then if we put like some mountains in here and they're, you know, overlapping each other and creating some depth. And then if we added some clouds, the clouds are, you know, happening. They're an area of interest and we're putting clouds where that those other points are intersecting, right? And then we might have some water down here and some stuff in the foreground. Okay, so this is a landscape that is following the rule of thirds, right? So if we wanted to abstract something like this, we can just take note of like, what are the shapes, the main shapes that we're seeing in a landscape like this. I've got some vertical lines that kind of create, like if these were trees, that create this like heart rate monitor sort of shape overall. I've got these like bulbous shapes of the mountains, which could be triangular shaped, or, you know, they're organic like rocks, right? Mountains are just big rocks. And then I've got the clouds, which are very ethereal, sort of bulbous shapes as well. And then the last, well, so I'm basically just telling you all the shapes that like inspire me right here. So I'm just gonna pull some of these shapes out of this little landscape that I just drew and then draw them in the margins here. So I've got some information that reminds me of this kind of a shape. I've got the cloud shapes. Another good reason for using this charcoal is that I don't have to worry about my pencil lines not showing up on screen. That's always an issue when I'm drawing in graphite in these classes. Okay, and then I mentioned that I really like to use, you know, stars or this idea of bubbles. I was inspired by the way bubbles kind of float up at the bottom of like a Topo Chico or a sparkling water years ago, and started putting this, you know, stars that like float in a pattern like that. It reminds me of like fairy dust or something that shows up in a lot of my work. And then another thing that I've been putting in my abstract work, which I'm not the first person to, you know, be stuck on a certain shape or pattern like this, but rectangles that kind of stagger, that float up in a staggered way. So, and I was inspired by mushrooms growing on the side of trees and how they create this pattern as they grow in a staggered way up the side of trees. So those are kind of the main shapes that I'm using in these studies that we're doing today. And there's a few different ways that I combine them that shows up a lot in my work. But another thing that definitely shows up in like this one right here is just a scribble, just like a nice little compacted scribble. And a good reason for doing that is that it adds some interesting texture. And I definitely did some of that with some of the paint when creating this example here. So we'll do some of that next week in the premium class, kind of scribbling and creating some texture like that. Okay, so these are kind of the building blocks, the shapes. And if you have, you know, some shapes that really inspire you, or, you know, a certain doodle that you like to use, you know, definitely sketch some of those shapes in your margin. Or if there's a certain pattern that you're really inspired by, like let's say a brick pattern is one that, you know, might interest you. So we had bricks in on the backsplash in my kitchen that the tiles have a brick pattern to them, and we put those in our sketching flowers in a vase class last week. So that might be a pattern that interests you. Or, you know, maybe circles, kind of an obvious one, but maybe like the way grapes stack on top of each other and create a little you know, pattern of overlapping circles. Feel free to share some other shapes or patterns that are really inspiring to you in the chat. And I can pop my chat open right now and see if people have any interesting ones to share. So yeah, tell me if you've got any like certain patterns, and then we can keep a lookout for them when you share at the end of the class. Okay, so somebody said diamond shapes, spirals, hexagons. Hexagons are amazing. They show up in nature so much, right? In a bee comb and turtle shells, heart shapes, U shapes like scales. Oh, a weave, yeah, in and out, weaving under and over. Teardrop shapes, yep, lots of teardrops, zigzags, and teardrops in nature. Somebody mentioned that. The infinity symbol, tendrils. Oh, these are so great, y'all. Yes, great examples. Mushroom shapes. Herringbone. I was going to say something else about one of those that somebody said, but I lost my train of thought. Oh, crescent shape, moon shapes are another one that I like to do a lot of. Years ago, there was a solar eclipse, and walking in my neighborhood, I noticed how the trees were all casting, because it was this part in the solar eclipse where I never noticed how, you know, we can see these like circles in between the like trees like the leaves on a tree, like cast on the ground, and it's a circle because it's a bunch of little suns. But then during the solar eclipse, it was like the tree was a pinhole camera that was showing all these crescent shapes cast across the ground. And I made an abstract work a few years ago that was really inspired by that, that had a bunch of overlapping crescent shapes like that. Y'all don't steal my ideas, by the way. I'm sharing for practice. I'm giving away a lot of my secrets in this class tonight, but they're secrets I've been using for many years, and I'm ready to share them. I would rather you use, oh yeah, chessboard. That's some great examples. Use things that inspire you. It's always more meaningful. And if something I'm sharing tonight really inspires you and you want to use it, you probably heard that like great artists steal, right? But that means that you steal in a way that makes it your own. And the general copyright laws say as long as you're not taking more than 30% of another artist's work, you're allowed to pass it off as your own. So if there's something that I'm using in my work that really inspires you, then you just, the creativity comes in and how can you make it your own? But y'all had some wonderful ideas as well to use as inspiration. And I'd love to see some examples at the end of the class that are very inspired by all of those ideas that you shared. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is layers, is building layers. So in a landscape, when we're painting the landscape, just going back to the landscape as our like entryway to, understanding the concepts of a composition, it's best to paint a landscape from the background to the foreground. So as you're painting, let's say you've got a tree that's going in front of the sky, it makes more sense to paint the sky first and then the tree, because then you're not going to paint yourself into a corner, so to speak, where you have to go in and fill in the sky inside of all of those the leaves, right, on the tree. So it makes more sense to just go ahead and paint the sky, then paint, whatever's in the middle ground, and then paint that tree in the foreground. So working from the background forward. And we're going to do the same thing with these abstract studies. We're going to think about the background first, and then we're going to build on those layers in the background. So this goes back to the ideas of like, what is a kindergartner doing and how do you know when to stop the kindergartner? Okay, so a kindergartner might take some paint and smear it all around, and that will become the background, right? And then maybe they put like a few things in the middle ground and the foreground, and then that's when you're like, that's beautiful, and you take it away and you give them a new sheet of paper. And that's what I did with my kids. And I've got some work framed on the wall in my house that my daughter painted when she was 2 even. And people are amazed that she painted it when she was 2, but it's because, I stopped her and took it away from her. So with these studies, we're going to first lay down a kind of big shape. And we're going to use a lighter color, or lighter colors for the background, or some sort of like base color that we feel like is going to tie the whole thing together. And then we're going to have something that's overlapping that we're going to consider like our middle ground in the study. So like right here, for example, I've got this big light green orb in the background here. And then I overlapped that with a slightly darker green orb. And then these kind of vines hanging over. So when somebody said tendrils, that really resonated with me because I also love thinking about vines, kind of hanging down like tendrils. And so I overlapped with that. And then what I considered to be the foreground was these dark brown shapes. And then I added some texture with the charcoal here. And then I added some sort of detail. So foreground, middle ground, background, starting with background and ending with something in the foreground. And then also I'm going kind of big to small with my shapes. So I put a big shape in the background and I used a lighter color. And feel free to take notes on this formula that I'm using here. I think it's a pretty effective formula. And it's definitely one that can be really helpful in, you know, creating like some work that is uniquely your own. So a big lighter shape in the background. I'll just go ahead and write it down, my formula here. So step one, a big lighter shape. And we'll talk about color scheme in just a second here. So we've got a lighter color. We pick our colors, and out of those colors, we choose the lighter colors, and bigger, lighter shape in the background. And then step two is overlap that with something related. So a related color, maybe a related color and a related shape. Something related that's interacting, that's like, you know, interacting with the background. I'm not going outside of my camera. There, I'll scooch that over. Okay, so overlap it with something related or interacting with the background. And then step three, so this is the background. Step two is the middle ground. And then, yeah, the charcoal pencil is really not the best thing for taking notes here. I feel like I'm smearing it all over the place. And then step three is the foreground. And that is where you want to really start to create some depth. So the foreground, you want it to feel like it's far away, closer to the viewer. So far away from the background, not interacting with the background like the second layer. Okay, how do you do that? You pick a different shape, something that's different, right? And so you want a different color, you want a contrasting color. Contrasting color, contrasting shape, you know, something that really stands apart. You know, like this tree line really stands apart from these mountains. It feels really far away from the mountains. It feels closer to the viewer. You know, it's very contrasting in shape and color and in a lot of different ways, right? So we're creating some separation from the background there. All right. And then the last layer is some kind of detail. And I like to think of this as like a wild card. Some kind of wild card. So something that doesn't fit, something that you wouldn't expect. Like you wouldn't maybe expect these like rings of Saturn to wrap around whatever this is, right? It's unexpected, or maybe the scribble, or maybe, you know, these little pinpoints, or let me go back to some of y'all's examples from the chat. Maybe, oh, like a cactus, maybe like the prickly thorns on a cactus. How would that show up? Or maybe these floating mushroom shapes, or floating infinity symbols, or floating teardrops, or a zigzag. Yeah, any of those would be great things. I mean, these could be used for any parts of the composition, but you know, think of your ideas and what could be your wild card thing. So for me, it's usually the little floating rectangles, or the floating dots or bubbles that come out like a little fairy mist, or the crescent moons. All right, let's get into the color layers here. Okay, so I'm gonna go to a new blank page here. I'm gonna get a clean blank page that doesn't have, that's pretty good. Okay. And yeah, some of these examples y'all put in the chat, like I feel like the checkerboard or the chessboard or the trapezoids, like those are sorts of shapes that I feel like would be great, like substantial things to put in the background. All right, let's talk about color schemes. So I'm just remembering I have had a class where I've talked about color theory extensively, but I haven't had one that's just on color theory. The one that I think would be the most helpful to refer back to was a class on painting skin tones last year. And I forgot to have Chanel go looking for that one, but if you just search on YouTube for skin tones, the way that you mix a skin tone with paint is to use complementary colors. So complementary colors are colors that are opposite on the color wheel from each other. So red and green, orange and blue, and violet and purple are all sets of complementary colors. And you can just think colors that, you know, like Christmas, we use red and green as a color scheme, or sports teams like to use contrasting colors. It's not necessarily that those colors look good together, but they're highly contrasting, and so they, you know, they stand out next to each other quite a bit. So we're not using, and like in these landscape and skin tone colors, we don't necessarily have all complementary colors here, but we do have things that are close enough, like this very this color. Oh wait, that's not the one that shows up a little bit orangey. Hang on, sometimes they're a little deceptive, like I know I used something that had an orange. There it is. Okay. So this one has in the skin tone set, it's the they're not labeled with colors, both names, but it's 912, the number on it, but it has sort of an like a tan orangey feeling, and it's also very similar to the colors that I'm going to be using next week, like I said. Okay, so when we put that blue next to that peachy tan color, we get something that feels like contrasting like orange and blue. So basically you're just looking for colors that go well together, colors that you find pleasing next to each other. Another good color scheme to use would be analogous colors, so colors that are next to each other on the color wheel. So this like lavender purple is kind of like a blue violet. So blue violet, and then blue green and blue. Those are all pretty analogous, right? So we've got those three colors, which are very similar to each other and that go well together. And then I threw in there a wild card color. So that's my tips for color schemes, and I'll write that down. So analogous colors, colors that go well together. So think how you know, might decorate a room, right? Colors that go well together. Y'all tell me some color schemes that you have like in your living room. Start throwing out color schemes that you decorate your living room with. Look at your couch. What do you have? What's the color of your couch and the colors of the throw pillows on your couch? All right, see, we got it right there, blue and tan. So it's kind of a neutral version of contrasting colors, right? I see orange and black, sage and tan. That's a great one. So we've got like, that's kind of your neutral green and tan. Those are like two good neutral colors. Pink and white, lovely. Blue, yellow, tan. Yeah, blue and yellow. That's kind of like south of France, right? Those like you see lots of blues and yellows together. Blue, yellow, and tan. Okay, y'all have so many great examples that I don't need to write them all down, but you get the idea. Okay, so find some colors in your and maybe make like a few different little piles of colors here, and we'll just create some like little color schemes. So I'm going to just use the same color schemes I used before, so I don't have to think too hard about it. But I've got this lavender color, and then testing it off to the side to make sure that's the same one. And then I've got a blue green, or kind of a, that's my aqua marine color. And then I guess I used a few different blues on that one. Okay, and then black is great to just throw in there. You almost don't even notice it when you've got all these contrasting colors, but it's so essential. Having a black in there, like I feel like this one got a little busy, and when I started to put the black in, it's like it's so essential, and it definitely is noticeable like over here where it's creating contrast, but like I put a lot of black on top of this, and it just ties it all together, you know? So it also just helps with your contrast and separation. So I'm gonna throw some black into the mix. And then my wild card color was in this one, was my peachy tan color. Oh, and I am very aware of the time. I need to speed it up. Okay, so you get the idea. All right, and then I'm just going to show you what I used for the other ones. I'm not going to do this for all of them. So I used light green, dark green, a couple of different browns, and then black. And then I also have the white charcoal in here on a lot of these. This is the color scheme that I used that I'll be using next week. So it's that orangey, peachy color, the blue, the black, the tan, and I had some pink in there too, but I didn't have a pink marker in these sets, so I just skipped it. But I did put the white in there because the white and the black are the same thing. They help create, like, just really drive home that contrast that you're looking for. And then over here is pretty much the same color scheme. In that one, the tan and the darker browns, and then I had the green and the peachy orange, and then the black and the white. Okay, so let's get some of these abstract studies going now, finally. It's a lot of prep to talk about what's going on here, right? It's a little more than just scribbling. Okay, so let me take I'm just going to imitate like a couple of these examples. I might not get a chance to do all of them. I think I'm just going to focus on this one and this one right here. Okay. All right, so I started with, I've got the light green and the dark green and the two browns, a couple of different browns, and then the black here. So started with kind of a cloudy, and I know this isn't showing up on the camera very much right now, but hopefully it will when I get it colored in. So started with a very cloudy orb shape in this light sagey green. It'll stand out more when we get a darker green going on top of it. So it's just a very blobby green shape. Nothing to write home about yet. And then I overlapped it with this army green and created a little blob on top of it. So I'm starting to get this middle ground layer that's interacting and overlapping with the background layer. And also, I've already started to introduce the idea of thirds, right? If we were to frame this in a rectangle, where did I put that overlap? That overlap is happening right about there where those lines of intersection would be happening, right? So I've already started to follow the rule of thirds. And, you know, when you have been drawing and painting for as many years as I have and talking and teaching about composition for as long as I have, it just, becomes a natural thing that you do and you don't even have to think about it. But if you do have to think about it, you could draw your little frame around here and with a pencil and put those lines of intersection and make sure that you're having some sort of, overlap or interesting moment happen where those lines of intersection those points of intersection are happening. Okay, and then it looks like I used the lighter tan. So again, I'm thinking about the rule of thirds and I'm going into the bottom third here and I'm creating this foreground layer, step 3, that feels separate from the other two, overlapping a little bit at the bottom here, but mostly kind of doing its own thing, right? Made it feel a little bit like water. And then to make that feel even more dynamic, I added darker brown. And yeah, the thick texture is another way to like create, separation. So with the paint, we can really obviously layer it on and get some like thick texture to happen, but we're going to create our texture. So our wild card could also be a thick texture. If you want to add that to your notes, that's one thing I didn't add to my notes, but the wild card thing, as I called it, could also be some sort of texture that you wouldn't expect. Okay, and then looks like I had a darker brown. Is that it? Oh, that's a gray. I guess I just made that look dark brown whenever I added the black to it. Okay, so let me just use that brown again. I'm like, I know I used this set, but oh, I got too much on my desk. It's still over here in the package. All right, get this dark brown and start to add this like, I'm also a big sci-fi nerd and I love thinking about like cities and space, this like imaginary city that's created from elements unknown to man, right? So, oh, my cat's making a Michael's class appearance here. All right, cool. She's settling down on the table. All right, so there's my little city in space. It also feels like it could be something organic there as well. All right, and then I'm going to take that charcoal and kind of scribble right here and create some texture. You could use the black marker if you wanted as well, but yeah, just kind of add something else there. And then, let's see, and then my wild card thing was add my little, these things. This shows up in my work quite a bit. I'll put like 3 dots on top of them. Don't ask me why. And then I've got these like little vines hanging down. Okay, so that's a little bit of the wild card thing, but then I've also got my little stream of fairy dots coming out of there. That's their official name, is fairy dots. All right, so yeah, this definitely has like a sci-fi thing going on, and people often come into my studio when I'm doing open studio events, and they get my number pretty quick and ask me if I like science fiction, and I feel like it's pretty obvious when you see some of my work that looks like that. Okay, and then this last one, we'll do another example here together, and then hopefully some of y'all are making some examples that are, of your own creation that have, some of these elements that are unique to you and your interests. You might not be into sci-fi at all. All right, so this one is definitely inspired by the rectangle pattern that I do so much of. So I'm also very inspired by lucid dreaming. That's something that I have been fascinated by since I was a teenager, but didn't practice it until the pandemic really awakened my interest in lucid dreaming again. And just thinking about this language of dreams and symbolism in dreams. And I started to try to create a visual language that represented different elements that show up a lot in my dream life. So that's how I described this rectangle pattern showing up a few years ago. I won't go too much into that, but that's part of how I've explained that away sometimes. All right, and then I've got a blue that I'm overlapping that with. And then it's kind of fun if you get a couple of colors that, you know, create like a third color where they overlap right there. I guess I didn't do that in this other example because I'm noticing how they don't have that little layer in them, but that's really interesting. Like if you use, you know, blue and pink, you might blend them and end up with a purple in between where they overlap. Okay, so that's what I did with those. And then I went ahead and got my, you know, this one, it's a little less landscapey for sure, but it still has a background, a middle ground, and then these Saturn rings that come around, and the little scribble is like the foreground element, since it feels, you know, so distant, but I guess it is still interacting with them. But I also put a nice scribble on there. They don't always have to perfectly follow these formulas. The main idea is to just don't overdo it with any one element. You know, like I've definitely done that before as I'm, you know, falling in love with certain, you know, patterns or shapes. Like when I first started putting the rectangles into my work, oh man, y'all, I've got some paintings where it's like, yeah, that was a little too many rectangles. Like there can be too much of a good thing. Like I'd have this beautiful background and then I just covered it in the little floating rectangles. And it's like, okay, got a little carried away there. So, you know, and then there was even an example like this one that went a little too far. So it's hard to know when to stop sometimes. And I definitely, you know, understand that and can get carried away myself. Okay, the next element that I added to this one was the tan color, which yeah, it was this one. So, and this is where I did my little floating rectangle things, little staggered, and I did them in a vertical pattern. And then I felt like it just needed something else that was highly contrasting. So I used the white charcoal. It's the first time we're using that tonight, but I kept with the rectangles, putting those in a variety of sizes. And then I also added a few little star points, like just feels like little stars of white around. And then I also added with the black my little fairy dots. And I like it when they feel like there's just one that starts it and then they multiply as they drift out of the scene. Okay, so there's two examples there, and I shared my you know, little formula that I follow here, and there are tons of amazing abstract artists who I look at who inspire me. I think working in your sketchbook like this to prepare lots of different ideas, and then that way, if you know, when you go to work with the paint, you've got a few different ideas to pull from is a great method so that you're not just flying blind. So, you know, you definitely, if you're gonna paint with us next week with the thick paint pouches, have you know, a few different ideas, you know, unless you're gonna just follow along and do one like this. This one's very similar to the last little study that I just did. And I, you know, maybe it won't end up this busy. Maybe we'll do a more minimal version of it. That's definitely a maximalist version of that painting. I'd love to see some of your examples. We have a few minutes left here, so if you want to hold up your sketches, Chanel can spotlight you and I can see some of your work. And please tag me if you share any of these on social media. I'd love to see them if we don't get a chance to see them now. Oh yes, that's lovely. I like the little wavy lines you introduced there. And I like how the one that's it looks different than mine. It feels a little more landscapey. Very nice. Oh, I love that you used some different color schemes there. Those are really fun. Love the pink and purple is a great combination. Yeah, we did a premium class that got close to this of several months back where I was encouraging people to use different color schemes than mine, and pink and purple was one I was pushing on everyone. Oh, I love that. Yeah, I love how you combined some of the elements in some of those examples and made them very unique in that path. Can you hold up the other way? It kind of went off screen. Hold it up in the middle so I can see yours. Yes. Oh yeah. I love that it feels like a crescent or a boat. Oh yeah, that's very, very geometric. It's pattern showing up there. Oh, nice, Sarah. I love the one on top, how unique that one is. It's using a different color scheme there. And the one on the bottom feels sort of like a building, the way the rectangles kind of stacked like windows. Love it. Oh, I see someone said it's so hard to stay abstract and not make it more representational. Yeah, I agree. I think, you know, but that's fine. You know, it can be an abstracted landscape. It doesn't have to be totally abstract. There's no rules. Those are really nice. Yes, love it. And yeah, the more you know, if you're not used to being this kind of loose and organic with your mark making, the more you practice just being loose, the more organic those shapes and forms will become. Very nice. Yeah, I love how these are so different, even though some of them are, you know, obviously following along with the examples that I did, but you all made them your own in some way. I love that shape at the bottom with the little zigzag lines coming into it, and how I feel I'm pointing with my cursor, even though y'all can't see my cursor. I love how it almost feels like a map. The lines the black line that you drew overlapping on the top right. Very nice. Let's see. I keep putting my little like views. Like, could you hold it up a little more? I'm sorry, I've got something on my screen blocking it. Very nice. Yeah, I love the blue and the yellow together. That's a really nice combination. Lovely. Ooh, this one looks different, but it's getting lost in your background. Oh, I love it. Yeah, I was really hoping for one where somebody did their own thing a little more. Yes. Ooh, I love those little, feels like inspired by flowers a little bit, but the way you overlapped them, yes. And red is such a great wild card color to use for sure. I love hot pink. I love making like a hot pink as my wild card. That one's so fun. I'd love to know what inspired you with that one. Like fruit or All right, there's a nice little composition that's showing foreground, middle ground, and background there for inspirational scene. I love it. And the clouds. Very nice. Ooh, look at those colors. Those are really nice. Wow. Talk about, yeah, taking my examples and making them your own. Those are so unique. Even though you use the same colors and shapes, it's still like your line quality on the black squiggly lines is really, really nice. Ooh, yeah, that one's very unique too. Definitely, I see my influence there, but it's just different in a lot of ways from the other examples. Really nice. Yeah, I love to see it. It looks like you combined some of those inspirational sketches together too. And again, that line quality. If we had more time, maybe I'll do another one of these abstract studies for sure, especially since I called it composition tips and tricks, abstract studies. We can focus on line quality and just some of these other aspects of this. Okay, nice. All those light colors. Yeah, if you get like a darker color in there, that would create some really strong contrast to overlap that. All right, we have gone over time because y'all had so many beautiful examples. And yeah, I will definitely do another abstract class. And thank you all so much for having such wonderful work to share with me. It's so rewarding. And hopefully I'll see a lot of you next week in that premium class where we'll be using the thick abstract paint. It's gonna be a lot of fun. All right, thank you all and have a wonderful evening.